Tonight, you'll fall asleep to the story of a man who refused to stay dead. Welcome in, get comfortable, and let yourself slowly drift. Before we begin, tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always love seeing where these stories are reaching, and if you enjoy slow, immersive stories made for sleep, don't forget to subscribe. Now, dim the lights, settle in, and let's begin. Tonight's story is Rasputin, the man who wouldn't die. Long before Russia's great palaces whispered his name with fear, disgust, hope, and desperate faith, Grigori Yefimovich Rasputin belonged to the wide silence of Siberia. He was born in the village of Pokrovskoye, near Tyumen in western Siberia, into a peasant family whose life was measured by weather, soil, river crossings, livestock, church bells, and survival. Even the year of his birth has been disputed by later writers, but modern reference works generally place it on January 22, 1869, New Style, with older calendars recording it as January 10th. That uncertainty matters because uncertainty followed him all his life. Rasputin would become one of those figures around whom fact and rumor grew together like roots under frozen earth, impossible to separate without breaking both. What is solid is this: he began not as a court magician or prophetic madman, but as a peasant's son in a remote world where holiness and superstition often lived in the same house. Pokrovskoye was not the sort of place that seemed likely to produce a man who would one day stand at the center of imperial collapse. It was a village of rough roads and harsher winters, a community where people knew one another's kin, sins, losses, harvests, and habits. His father, Yefim, worked as a peasant and also as a driver or courier, a role that placed him a little more securely than the poorest around him, though not outside the hard logic of rural life. Rasputin grew up in a culture in which religion was everywhere present, not always in an educated or refined form, but in icons, saints' days, processions, fasting, and a powerful sense that the visible world was crowded with invisible forces. Siberian peasant religion in the 19th century was orthodox, but it was also local, emotional, and practical. God was real, the saints were near, sin was dangerous, and the miraculous could break into ordinary life at any moment. In that world, a man could be coarse and devout at once, lustful and prayerful, violent and penitent, and still be understood not as a contradiction, but as a human soul at war with itself. Stories about Rasputin's childhood are fragmentary and often colored by later legend. Some accounts cast him as unnervingly perceptive from an early age, almost marked out by destiny. Others present him as unruly, half-literate or illiterate, prone to drinking, mischief, and impulsive behavior. The stronger historical ground lies in the simple conclusion that very little documented evidence survives from his early years, and much of what later became known about the boy Rasputin was shaped by memoir, rumor, political hatred, or retrospective myth-making after he became infamous. He almost certainly received little formal education. He did not emerge from a monastery school, a seminary, or the disciplined life of official church learning. Whatever spiritual language he later used, it came from experience, memory, repetition, oral culture, and intensely personal performance rather than scholarship. He would never be mistaken for a theologian, and that was part of his strange power. He seemed to many not polished but elemental. As a young man, Rasputin married Praskovia Dubrovina. He did not become a monk, despite the title Mad Monk that later attached itself to him in newspapers and popular imagination. In reality, he was a married layman with children, a fact that matters because it cuts through one of the oldest distortions about him. He and Praskovia had 3 children who survived infancy, including daughters Maria and Varvara, and a son, Dmitri. Their marriage did not transform him into a settled village husband in the conventional sense. He remained restless, emotionally intense, and difficult to contain within the expected boundaries of peasant life. The image of Rasputin as a monk was always false. The image of him as a wandering holy man grew instead from a different Russian tradition, that of the Stranik, the pilgrim or spiritual wanderer who moved between sacred places, shrines, monasteries, and households, carrying stories, prayers, rumors, and an aura of otherworldliness. Something changed in him in the late 1890s. Historians disagree on the exact trigger. Some later tales connected the shift to punishment for theft, others to grief, spiritual crisis, or a vision. What appears most consistently in reliable accounts is that around 1897, he underwent a religious awakening and traveled on pilgrimage to the St. Nicholas Monastery at Verkhoturye. There, or in the broader experience of pilgrimage itself, he seems to have been altered. He returned to Pokrovskoye with the reputation of a changed man, more fervent, more visibly devout, more consumed by prayer and religious seeking. Whether this transformation was sudden or gradual, sincere or mixed with ambition, is impossible to prove in full. But it is historically clear that he did not simply invent a holy identity in old age after arriving in the capital. The pattern began in Siberia, among people who had known him before power touched him. He began to pray intensely, to travel, to visit holy sites, and to gather a reputation that was not yet political but spiritual. For some villagers and local believers, he appeared to possess unusual gifts: insight into people's troubles, emotional force in prayer, and an ability to speak of repentance and God in a way that felt urgent rather than learned. The Russian countryside had long made room for charismatic holy wanderers, men outside the formal hierarchy of the church who nevertheless inspired devotion. Such figures could be loved, distrusted, or both at once. Rasputin fit that pattern almost too perfectly. He was not conventionally respectable. He was not cleanly separable into saint or fraud. He seemed to draw authority from precisely the fact that he'd been a sinner. In a deeply orthodox culture, the repentant sinner could seem more compelling than the polished priest. His roughness became part of the testimony. It suggested struggle, not performance. To some, that meant authenticity. To others, it meant danger. This was also the period when rumors attached themselves to him with increasing force. Accusations circulated that he had fallen in with the Kalaisti, a radical and illegal religious sect associated in the public imagination with ecstatic rites, bodily frenzy, and sexual misconduct. These allegations would haunt his name for the rest of his life, because they gave his enemies a ready-made explanation for his unsettling charisma. He was not holy, they said, but depraved under a mask of holiness. Yet the historical record is murky here. Some reference works repeat the claim or say he likely came into contact with Klist ideas, while more cautious scholarship notes that repeated investigations failed to prove he was ever actually a member. This uncertainty is important. Rasputin's reputation for sexual license was real and not entirely invented, but the lurid image of him as a sectarian prophet of ritualized debauchery rests on shakier ground than popular legend suggests. The accusation mattered politically because it made him easier to fear, easier to mock, and easier to cast as a corrupter of women and dynasties alike. But uncertainty, again, is closer to the truth than certainty. By the early 1900s, Rasputin's wandering life had widened his world beyond Pokrovskoye. He traveled through Siberia and into more connected religious circles. Accounts place him in Kazan around 1904 or 1905, where he impressed some churchmen and devout lay observers. This matters because Rasputin's rise was not simply a leap from peasant hut to imperial bedroom. It moved through networks of religious patronage and curiosity. He fascinated people who were already looking for spiritual intensity outside ordinary parish life. Late imperial Russia, especially in educated and aristocratic circles, had a strong appetite for mysticism, holy men, starets figures, healers, visionaries, and those who seemed to promise contact with divine power beyond bureaucratic religion. Rasputin did not create this hunger. He entered it at exactly the right time. The empire that would later condemn him had already prepared a place for someone like him. To understand why men and women found him compelling, it is necessary to imagine not the caricature that later posters and tabloids preferred, but the living presence described by contemporaries. He was said to have had piercing eyes, a rough peasant face, and an ability to fix his attention on a person so completely that they felt seen, judged, forgiven, or possessed. He spoke in a language thick with religion, but not stiff with doctrine. He could sound simple and prophetic in the same breath. He prayed with force, not elegance. He was capable of warmth, manipulation, emotional intuition, and theatrical stillness. One person saw saintliness, where another saw animal cunning. Both reactions could emerge from the same meeting. This is one reason Rasputin became so difficult to interpret historically. He was not merely invented by his admirers or by his enemies. He seems to have genuinely produced radically different experiences in those who encountered him. His home life remained in Siberia even as his spiritual reputation spread. Praskovia stayed in Pokrovskoye. Their marriage endured in its own irregular fashion, despite long absences and his growing notoriety. This, too, complicates the legend. Rasputin did not abandon his family in the formal sense of disappearing from them forever, but he increasingly belonged to another life, one measured by journeys, devotions, followers, and widening circles of influence. That dual existence became a pattern: peasant husband and wandering holy man, father and ascetic, sinner and penitent, provincial and soon-to-be cosmopolitan intruder. He was already becoming the sort of figure onto whom others projected desires they barely understood. The poor could see one of their own touched by God. The spiritually restless could see a living conduit to mystery. The cynical could see a sensual opportunist cloaked in piety. All of them, in part, were looking at something real. At this stage in his life, Russia itself was changing in ways that would eventually make Rasputin more than a curiosity. The old empire was immense, unequal, deeply religious, and increasingly strained. Industrial growth had sharpened social tensions, political unrest was rising. The authority of the monarchy remained sacred in theory but vulnerable in practice. Intellectuals challenged old certainties, revolutionaries organized, peasants carried old grievances, and even the upper classes mixed cynicism with spiritual hunger. The court in St. Petersburg still glittered, but beneath it the empire was restless. Figures like Rasputin emerged not only from village religion, but from a larger crisis of confidence. When institutions feel brittle, charismatics become magnetic. When official answers lose force, the man who seems to carry mystery in his body acquires a dangerous kind of appeal. As his reputation spread, churchmen in higher circles began to hear of the Siberian pilgrim. Introductions followed. He gained letters of recommendation. He moved through ecclesiastical and aristocratic channels that linked provincial religious enthusiasm to the imperial capital. This progression was not inevitable, but once it began, it had momentum. Rasputin was the kind of man who could be dismissed after one meeting and pursued after another. He unsettled people into remembering him. By the time he approached St. Petersburg, he carried with him all the contradictions that would define him to history: peasant and prophet, husband and wanderer, healer and scandal, devout man and object of obscene rumor. He had not yet met the imperial family. He had not yet been accused of steering a throne. He had not yet become the symbol of a dynasty's decay. But the shape of the coming drama was already there in him. Siberia had produced not a legend, not yet, but a man whose life encouraged legend at every step. What made Rasputin especially potent was not that he was impossible to explain, but that every explanation seemed insufficient. To say he was only a fraud ignores the devotion he inspired in people who believed themselves changed by his prayers. To say he was only a holy man ignores the repeated pattern of behavior that scandalized admirers and enemies alike. To say he was merely a symptom of Romanov weakness arrives too late, because before he ever reached the Romanovs, he had already become a vessel for the old Russian tension between flesh and spirit, repentance and appetite, sanctity and corruption. He emerged from a countryside where suffering made people attentive to wonders, and where a man did not need education to be taken seriously as an instrument of God. In another age, he might have remained a regional curiosity, remembered in local memory and forgotten by the state. But this age was racing toward catastrophe, and catastrophe has a way of pulling strange men into its center. So the first truth about Rasputin is not that he would not die. It is that he came from a world in which the boundary between the earthly and the supernatural already felt thin. Before poison, bullets, palace conspiracies, tabloid fantasies, and revolutionary hindsight, there was a Siberian village and a restless peasant who stepped out of ordinary life and discovered that people were willing to see in him whatever they most feared or desperately needed. He learned that a reputation could travel faster than a man. He learned that sin confessed could look like holiness deepened. He learned that charisma itself could become a form of power. And as he moved westward, away from the river roads of Pokrovskoye and toward the jeweled heart of the empire, Russia was preparing to receive him not as a citizen, nor as a priest, nor as a monk, but as something far more explosive. A living answer to a prayer no one would be able to control. By the time Grigori Rasputin first set foot in St. Petersburg, he was no longer just a wandering pilgrim from Siberia. He carried with him something far more intangible and far more powerful, a reputation that arrived ahead of him, shaping expectations before he even spoke a word. The capital of the Russian Empire, with its grand boulevards, glittering palaces, and rigid social hierarchies, was an unlikely destination for a man like him. And yet, in a strange and quiet way, it was exactly where he belonged. St. Petersburg at the beginning of the 20th century was a city divided against itself. On the surface, it radiated imperial confidence. The Romanov dynasty still ruled, The aristocracy still hosted lavish gatherings, and the machinery of empire still functioned with outward precision. But beneath that polished exterior, something restless and uncertain was taking hold. Intellectuals debated the future of Russia. Revolutionaries whispered in shadows. The working class grew increasingly discontent. And within the upper classes, there was a growing fascination with mysticism, spirituality, and the unseen. It was into this atmosphere that Rasputin arrived around 1903 or 1904, introduced through religious circles that were already intrigued by stories of the Siberian holy man. He was not the first wandering mystic to pass through the capital, but he was different in a way that was difficult to define and impossible to ignore. At first, his presence was small, almost peripheral. He met with members of the clergy, with devout aristocratic women, with those who were already inclined to believe in spiritual gifts that existed outside the formal church. These early encounters were crucial. Rasputin did not force his way into power. He was invited gradually by people who felt something in him they could not quite explain. He spoke simply, often in a slow, deliberate manner, using language that felt closer to prayer than conversation. He did not lecture like a priest. He did not argue like a scholar. Instead, he listened. And when he spoke as though he were drawing from somewhere deeper than thought. This gave him an unusual presence, one that made people feel as though they were being seen, not just heard. For some, this was profoundly comforting. For others, it was deeply unsettling. Among his early supporters were influential figures within the church and aristocracy, who saw in Rasputin a kind of live-in spirituality that felt authentic in contrast to the rigid formalism of official religion. He was introduced into salons and private gatherings, where religion, philosophy, and mysticism blended together in long conversations that stretched late into the night. It was here that Rasputin began to refine something that would later define his influence: the ability to adapt himself to the person in front of him. He could be humble and submissive when speaking to those above him in status, yet quietly authoritative when offering spiritual insight. He could appear deeply devout, yet also strangely free from the strict moral boundaries that others expected from holy men. This contradiction fascinated people, but it also planted the first seeds of suspicion. There were whispers, even then, about his behavior, about his closeness to women, about the intensity of his gaze, about the way he blurred the line between spiritual guidance and something more personal, more physical, more ambiguous. Some dismissed these rumors as jealousy or misunderstanding. Others took them seriously. Rasputin, for his part, did little to defend himself against such talk. In some ways, he seemed to exist beyond it, as though reputation itself were something fluid, something that could be shaped, endured, or even used. As his network grew, so did his access. By 1905, Russia itself was in crisis. The events of that year, the unrest, the protests, the violence, shook the foundations of the empire. Bloody Sunday had shattered the illusion that the Tsar was a distant but benevolent figure. Trust was breaking down, fear was rising, and in times of fear, people look for certainty. Within the imperial court, that fear was deeply personal. Tsar Nicholas II and Empress Alexandra lived not only with the burden of ruling a fragile empire, but with a private anguish that few outside their inner circle fully understood. Their son, the heir to the throne, suffered from hemophilia, a condition that made even small injuries potentially life-threatening. It was a secret guarded carefully because the stability of the dynasty depended on the strength of its heir. But secrecy did not lessen the fear. Every bruise, every fall, every unexplained pain carried with it the possibility of catastrophe. It was through this atmosphere of anxiety and quiet desperation that Rasputin's path began to move toward the very center of power. He did not arrive at the palace by force or ambition alone. He was brought there, drawn in by those who believed or hoped that he might be able to do what others could not. Before he ever met the imperial family, stories about him had already begun to circulate within their world. Stories of healing, of prayer that seemed to produce real, tangible effects, of a man who could bring calm where there was panic and relief where there was suffering. In a court filled with doctors, advisors, and officials, none of whom could truly protect the fragile life of the Tsarevich, the idea of a man like Rasputin held a dangerous kind of appeal. Because if even a small part of those stories were true, then he was not just another wandering mystic. He was hope. And hope, in the wrong place at the wrong time, can change the course of history. Rasputin's first introduction to the imperial family came in 1905, arranged through intermediaries who believed he might offer spiritual comfort to the deeply religious Empress Alexandra. She was already drawn to mysticism, already searching for signs, for meaning, for reassurance that her son's suffering was not without purpose. When Rasputin entered their world, he did not come as a political figure. He came as something much more subtle, a man of God, a healer, a presence. Accounts of his first meetings with the royal family describe a man who spoke gently, prayed with intensity, and radiated a kind of calm that contrasted sharply with the fear that often surrounded the young heir's condition. Whether by coincidence, suggestion, or something that remains difficult to explain even now, Rasputin seemed to have an effect on the boy. During moments of crisis when the Tsarevich was in pain or distress, Rasputin's presence, or even his written words, appeared to bring relief. This was not something that could be easily dismissed. To a mother watching her child suffer, it was everything. To Alexandra, Rasputin quickly became more than a spiritual advisor. He became a lifeline, a man through whom God's will might be understood, a man whose prayers seemed to reach where medicine could not. And from that belief, everything else would follow. Because once trust is given at that level, once a person is seen not just as helpful but as necessary, the boundaries that would normally limit influence begin to dissolve. Rasputin was still, in many ways, the same man who had left Pokrovskoye. He had not become educated. He had not adopted the polished manners of the court. He remained rough, direct, and deeply unconventional. But now he stood in rooms where decisions shaped the fate of an empire, and those who saw him as a fraud, or worse, began to realize something unsettling. He was not going away. He was moving closer, and the closer he moved, the more dangerous he became. Once Rasputin crossed the invisible threshold from interesting pilgrim to trusted presence, his life changed in a way that could never be undone. There are men who climb into influence by office, title, rank, or wealth. Rasputin rose by intimacy. That made him harder to understand and harder to resist. He was not a minister of state, not a bishop, not a general, not a scholar with a system or a party leader with followers in parliament. He possessed no official authority that could be measured on paper. And yet, by the years just after his first meetings with the imperial family, he had acquired something more potent than formal power. He had become important inside the private emotional world of the Romanovs. In a court where access was everything, that alone could transform a man from curiosity into a threat. The center of that transformation was not the Tsar at first, but the Empress Alexandra. To understand Rasputin's rise, it is necessary to understand her state of mind. Alexandra Feodorovna was not simply a queen clinging to superstition. She was a deeply religious woman, serious to the point of severity, isolated at court, often misunderstood and consumed by anxiety for her son. The boy who would one day inherit the Russian throne, Alexei Nikolaevich, had hemophilia, a hereditary disorder that impaired the blood's ability to clot. A bruise could become a crisis. An injury that another child might forget by evening could confine him to agony. Internal bleeding could bring fever, swelling, and terror. The disease also brought secrecy. Because the future of the dynasty depended on the heir, the condition was closely guarded. This forced the family into a terrible private loneliness. There were doctors around them, servants, ministers, cousins, guards, tutors, and clergy, but very few people could be fully trusted with the truth. Every attack reminded Alexandra that the throne rested on the body of a fragile child. Into that fear stepped Rasputin. His effect on Alexandra cannot be reduced to a single moment, though later legend often tried to do exactly that. It was not as though one dramatic miracle occurred. The court gasped, and he was suddenly enthroned as the holy savior of the Romanovs. It was subtler than that. Rasputin offered calm, certainty, and confidence in the middle of panic. He prayed not as a court priest might pray, with polished restraint, but with force and personal conviction. He spoke to Alexandra in the language she was ready to receive. Suffering had meaning. God remained present. Despair was a temptation to be resisted, and the child was not abandoned by heaven. He seemed to possess the one thing no physician could guarantee. He brought emotional relief. This mattered more than many later critics wished to admit. The Empress was not merely duped by spectacle. Rasputin gave her a pattern of hope. Time after time, when the child suffered and fear spread through the household, Rasputin appeared to steady that fear. There were episodes in which his presence, his prayers, or even a message from him coincided with improvement in Alexei's condition. Historians have offered various explanations. Some point out that a calming influence on both mother and child may have reduced stress at critical moments. Others note that physicians of the era sometimes prescribed treatments, including aspirin, that could worsen bleeding. Withdrawing medical intervention and allowing rest may have helped. Some believe suggestion and confidence played a real part. Others leave the matter open, admitting that the exact mechanism remains uncertain. But whatever the medical explanation, the emotional consequence is clear. Alexandra came to believe that Rasputin could help her son when others could not. Belief of that intensity changes everything around it. Nicholas II, by temperament, was more reserved than Alexandra and less naturally drawn into mystical dependence, but he too accepted Rasputin as a man of spiritual significance. Nicholas was pious, fatalistic, and often inclined to see events through the lens of divine order. He did not become Rasputin's disciple in the same emotional way Alexandra did, yet he tolerated and then protected him because he trusted Alexandra's conviction, valued domestic peace, and had seen enough episodes involving Alexei to conclude that Rasputin should not be casually dismissed. The Tsar's weakness was not theatrical obsession, it was passivity. He often allowed matters to drift until they hardened into habit. Once Rasputin became established as someone important to the Empress and apparently beneficial to the heir, Nicholas did not draw a firm boundary around him. That failure would have enormous consequences. By this point, Rasputin's name was moving through the capital with increasing speed. To some aristocratic believers, he was a holy man from the people, a living reminder that divine grace might appear where rank least expected it. To others, he was an embarrassment already. He had manners that did not fit the rooms into which he was being welcomed. He spoke plainly, sometimes crudely. He cultivated intimacy too quickly. He accepted admiration with an ease that made skeptics recoil. Women of high society who sought spiritual counsel from him often found themselves both disturbed and fascinated. Men who already distrusted the court's attraction to mystics saw in him an offense to order itself. The Russian elite could forgive corruption more readily than vulgarity. Rasputin brought both rumor and vulgarity wherever he went, and still, doors opened. He did not arrive in grand fashion. He entered drawing rooms, private apartments, religious gatherings, and aristocratic circles through personal recommendation. These were worlds where influence often moved along lines invisible to outsiders. A countess invited a friend, a clergyman vouched for a pilgrim. A devout hostess gathered guests curious to meet the Siberian starets, though that title was applied to him loosely and inaccurately. Rasputin himself was not an ordained elder in the formal monastic sense. Yet labels mattered less than impressions, and impressions were his real currency. He looked like a man from another Russia, not the cultivated Russia of French phrases and polished uniforms, but the older Russia of mud, prayer, icons, and raw belief. That contrast increased his mystique. In the artificial brilliance of the capital, authenticity itself could become theatrical power. He also understood, instinctively or deliberately, how to make each encounter feel charged. He could sit in silence until silence itself seemed meaningful. He could turn his full attention on a person and make them feel exposed. He spoke of repentance with the authority of someone who had known appetite. This, too, was central to his appeal. Rasputin did not project sterile purity. He projected struggle. For many believers, especially women searching for spiritual intensity rather than ecclesiastical discipline, this made him more compelling, not less. He was a sinner reaching toward God, and therefore human in a way polished holy men often were not. His defenders later insisted that his coarseness proved his honesty. His enemies insisted that his honesty about sin was merely a cloak for indulgence. Both perceptions fed his legend. Rumors about his relations with women multiplied. Some women visited him for prayer, advice, and blessing. Some were drawn into circles of emotional confession around him. Some later described experiences of spiritual exaltation in his presence. Others claimed he exploited women, using religion to break down ordinary moral boundaries. Stories spread that he taught sin must be experienced before repentance could be complete, an idea often linked to accusations of sectarian influence and sexual manipulation. The evidence for a consistent doctrine of that kind is poor, and many stories were exaggerated by hostile witnesses or inflated by the press. But it is equally unwise to imagine him as innocent of all misconduct. His behavior repeatedly gave fuel to scandal. He was known to drink. He could be flirtatious, invasive, and physically familiar. Even admirers sometimes found him troubling. There is always a crossing of lines around him, whether spiritual, social, or sexual. That is one reason the controversy around him grew. not in spite of his charisma, but because of it. Church authorities began to notice him more sharply. At first, he had benefited from introductions through religious channels, but as his notoriety spread, criticism from within the church increased. Some clerics were offended by the attention he received. Some distrusted his theology, such as it was. Others believed he was undermining the distinction between genuine spiritual guidance and dangerous enthusiasm. Investigations were opened more than once into his conduct and beliefs. None succeeded in finally crushing him. This pattern repeated itself throughout his career. Rasputin would be accused, examined, denounced, and yet survive, often because no investigation fully settled the matter and because his most important protectors remained in the imperial household. The inability of the church, the bureaucracy, and the nobility to decisively expose or expel him only deepened the sense that he possessed unnatural resilience. There was also another side to his growing influence, one less sensational, but equally important. Rasputin did not merely attract attention from people seeking marvels. He became part of a wider spiritual and psychological ecosystem around the court, in which prophecy, omens, suffering, and divine will were discussed with grave seriousness. The Romanovs were living through years of instability after the Revolution of 1905, when strikes, uprisings, mutinies, and political concessions had shaken the empire. The monarchy remained powerful, but its prestige had been damaged. The creation of the Duma did not solve the deeper crisis. Many within the imperial world believed Russia was under moral and spiritual assault. In such an atmosphere, a man who spoke as though he stood close to mystery could seem not merely helpful, but necessary. Rasputin benefited especially from Alexandra's growing conviction that he was sent by God for the protection of her son and perhaps the dynasty itself. She began to refer to him in terms that revealed deep reverence, even filial tenderness, seeing him as a man of prayer whose insight came from beyond ordinary understanding. This private language was disastrous in political terms. Every sign of closeness between the Empress and a peasant holy man invited contempt and suspicion, especially in a court already inclined to gossip. Yet, Alexandra seems not to have grasped how destructive appearances could become. She cared first about Alexei. Anyone who helped Alexei became precious. Anyone who attacked Rasputin seemed, by extension, to threaten the life of her child. That emotional equation trapped the throne. Because once Rasputin became linked in Alexandra's mind with her son's survival, criticism of him no longer felt like reasonable caution. It felt like cruelty, blindness, and spiritual treachery. Ministers, bishops, aristocrats, and relatives who warned against him often found themselves facing not mild disagreement, but a wall of maternal conviction. Nicholas, instead of imposing distance, usually retreated into patience. He disliked conflict, distrusted court intrigue, and had a strong habit of treating criticism of his household as improper interference. That allowed Rasputin's place to solidify. He did not yet dominate state policy in the way later legends suggested, and it is important to remain accurate here. In these early years of his deepening access, Rasputin's influence was real, but uneven. Personal before it was political. He did not sit with maps and ministries directing the empire like a hidden monarch. The more truthful danger was subtler. He entered the mechanism by which trust was distributed around the sovereign. He could recommend, criticize, bless, warn, and encourage. He could shape impressions of people. He could reinforce Alexandra's suspicions or hopes. He could become one more voice in a court environment where emotional confidence often counted more than competence. That kind of power is difficult to document line by line, but devastating in effect. Meanwhile, outside the palace, the city continued to transform his image. Newspapers were increasingly lively, rumor moved quickly, and stories about court life fed public appetite. Rasputin's name was not yet the giant national scandal it would later become, but the ingredients were already present. Here was a peasant with the ear of the royal family. Here was a religious wanderer in an age of unrest. Here was a man surrounded by women, whispers, and miracle stories. Here was someone who offended educated sensibilities simply by existing too near the throne. He seemed to embody all the anxieties of late imperial Russia at once: mysticism against modernity, peasant force against aristocratic refinement, private desperation against public dignity. And Rasputin himself, perhaps the most important factor of all, seemed to enjoy the current carrying him forward. He could still present himself as humble, as merely God's servant, but he was not indifferent to access. He learned the geography of influence. He learned who could be useful, who could be charmed, who could be ignored. He moved more confidently through the capital. The village wanderer had not vanished, but another self had emerged beside him, a man who knew his own effect on others and was willing to use it. That was the true beginning of the figure history remembers, not the corpse in the river, not the impossible assassination victim, not yet the monstrous symbol of a dynasty in decay. The real beginning of Rasputin's legend was this quieter and more dangerous phase, when belief hardened around him in private rooms and corridors, when a frightened mother came to see him as heaven's instrument, when a passive emperor failed to keep spiritual dependence from becoming political vulnerability, and when the city beyond the palace walls began to sense that something improper, intimate, and potentially catastrophic was taking root near the heart of the empire. As Rasputin's place within the imperial world became more secure, so too did the tension surrounding him. The court of Nicholas II had never been a peaceful place, but it was a place governed by ritual, lineage, form, and the delicate management of appearances. Rasputin violated all of it. He did not merely fail to fit in. He seemed almost to draw strength from his refusal to become acceptable. In salons and private receptions, in corridors outside chapel services, in whispered conversations between ladies-in-waiting and ministers, his name began to function less like the name of a man and more like the name of a problem. Some still defended him as a holy figure, unfairly maligned by worldly cynics, but for many others, he had become a symbol of something rotten entering the center of power. The difficulty was that he could not be dismissed as easily as any ordinary scandal. An indiscreet officer could be transferred. A troublesome official could be retired. A compromised cleric could be disciplined. Rasputin had no office to remove him from, no rank to strip away, no official status that could be formally revoked. He existed in a space between categories. He was unofficial and yet influential, vulgar and yet protected, peripheral and yet alarmingly close to the people who mattered most. That made him especially dangerous in the eyes of those who feared him. He seemed immune to the normal mechanisms of control. The deeper he moved into the orbit of the imperial family, the more court society divided around the question of what exactly he was. To believers, he was a man touched by divine grace, one of those rare figures whose roughness concealed a spiritual intensity, that the refined world could neither produce nor understand. To skeptics, he was a peasant opportunist who had discovered that the surest way into power was not through institutions, but through private suffering. To moralists, he was a sexual predator cloaking appetite in religion. To the politically anxious, he was something even worse, evidence that the throne itself had become vulnerable to irrational influence. This anxiety was magnified by Alexandra's increasing trust in him. She did not treat him as a passing comfort or useful curiosity. She leaned on him, she wrote to him, welcomed him, relied on him, and defended him with a force that astonished and exasperated those around her. Her emotional dependence was not theatrical. It came from the terrible logic of a mother who believed this man's prayers had repeatedly helped save her son. Once she'd accepted that, every insult against Rasputin felt to her like an assault on something sacred. Those who warned her against him were not merely disagreeing about etiquette or public perception. In her mind, they were attacking a source of hope placed in her life by God. Nicholas, meanwhile, remained what he so often was in moments of pressure: courteous, hesitant, inward, and unwilling to impose final boundaries where private feeling was concerned. He did not love gossip. He distrusted the intrigues of the court. He disliked the snobbery with which some aristocrats treated religious figures from the peasantry. And because he was protective of his family's privacy, criticism of Rasputin often seemed to him inseparable from criticism of Alexandra. This mattered enormously. It meant that each warning about Rasputin's conduct could be interpreted inside the palace not as a loyal act of caution, but as another example of hostile meddling from a society already too pleased with its own judgment. Rasputin understood enough of this to survive. Whether through instinct, cunning, or both, he recognized that his true protection did not depend on winning over the court as a whole. He only needed to remain indispensable to a very small number of people. If Alexandra continued to believe in him, if Nicholas continued to tolerate him, then scandal could be weathered. He did not need universal respect, he only needed access. Still, access came with consequences. By the late 1900s and early 1910s, stories about Rasputin multiplied beyond the private sphere. Women of aristocratic and upper-class circles visited him in increasing numbers. Some sought blessing, some confession, some advice, some healing, and some perhaps the thrill of being near a man whose reputation combined sanctity with danger. His apartments and meeting places became zones of fascination. He could be found receiving petitioners, speaking in a rough and intimate way, praying over people, embracing them, or moving among them in ways that defied respectable boundaries. It became almost impossible to tell where spiritual counsel ended and personal domination began. Those who encountered him often described the same strange doubleness. He could seem deeply attentive one moment and repulsively coarse the next. He could speak of Christ and repentance with tears in his eyes, then drink too much, behave indecently, or encourage forms of familiarity that scandalized observers. Some came away convinced they had been in the presence of a true man of God. Others left certain that he was a fraud animated by lust and vanity. The puzzle of Rasputin was not that one side lied and the other told the truth. It was that he appears to have genuinely inspired both responses. He was not a simple impostor pretending at holiness with machine-like consistency. He was a man of appetite and force whose religious intensity was real enough to persuade, and whose disorder was real enough to corrupt everything around it. This made him uniquely suited to an age already straining under contradiction. Russia in the years after 1905 remained outwardly intact, but tension ran through all levels of society. Reform had been offered, but not enough to satisfy reformers, and too much for reactionaries to accept with ease. The Duma existed, yet real autocratic power remained. Revolutionary energy had been suppressed, yet not extinguished. Industrial workers were restless. Peasants still carried old grievances. National minorities pushed against imperial control. The state functioned, but the confidence that once sustained it had thinned. In such an atmosphere, Rasputin's growing prominence felt to many like a symptom of national weakness. He did not cause that weakness, but he made it visible in a humiliating form. The press began to take greater interest. Russia did not have a completely free press, and censorship still mattered, especially where the imperial family was concerned. Yet rumor moved through newspapers, pamphlets, private letters, and conversation with extraordinary speed. Even when the most direct allegations could not be printed openly, insinuation was enough. Rasputin became the object of satirical attention, social gossip, and moral panic. In a political culture already filled with suspicion, he offered an irresistible story. A Siberian peasant holy man welcomed into the highest circles of the empire, surrounded by women, defended by the Empress, and whispered about as though he possessed supernatural authority. His enemies within society and church increasingly tried to gather evidence against him. Complaints accumulated, witnesses described impropriety, investigations probed his conduct, clerical authorities questioned his teachings. There were efforts to expose him as sexually corrupt, spiritually unsound, and socially dangerous. But exposure did not produce decisive removal. Partly this was because many accusations were tangled with exaggeration, malice, or class prejudice. Partly it was because Rasputin's defenders insisted that worldly people always hated true spiritual force. And partly it was because the most important audience for any evidence remained stubbornly unwilling to abandon him. As long as Alexandra saw attacks on Rasputin as spiritually blind and emotionally cruel, the machinery of disgrace could not fully work. One of the crucial turning points in Rasputin's rise came whenever the Tsarevich suffered a major bleeding episode, and Rasputin seemed once again connected to recovery. The most famous such incident, one that strengthened Alexandra's faith in him dramatically, took place in 1912, when the imperial family was at Spala in Poland, and Alexei became gravely ill after internal bleeding. The child was in severe danger, and the family feared the worst. Rasputin, not present at the scene, sent a message assuring Alexandra that the boy would not die and instructing that doctors not trouble him too much. Alexei's condition improved. To a historian, multiple explanations are possible. To Alexandra, the meaning was clear. Rasputin had intervened spiritually, and the child had lived. After that, her trust in him was no longer simply deep, it was nearly immovable. What mattered politically was not whether Rasputin had performed a miracle in any objective sense. What mattered was that the Empress believed he had. Once that belief became fixed, his standing was anchored in the most emotionally defended part of her life. Anyone trying to remove him now faced not merely a court favorite, but a man linked in the Empress's mind to the preservation of her son and therefore the future of the dynasty itself. At the same time, Rasputin's own self-understanding appears to have expanded. He was not content to remain merely a passive recipient of reverence. He increasingly offered opinions, recommendations, and warnings that extended beyond purely spiritual matters. He intervened in personal disputes. He advocated for some and disapproved of others. Petitioners came to him believing he could open doors. Those doors were not imaginary. Even without formal office, he could influence appointments indirectly by praising one figure, condemning another, or simply shaping Alexandra's impressions. This did not mean he personally controlled the whole machinery of government, as later sensational accounts sometimes implied. But it did mean he had become part of the atmosphere in which decisions were made. In a brittle autocracy, atmosphere could be fate. High society reacted with a mix of revulsion and fixation. He was denounced as dirty, drunken, sexually immoral, manipulative, and absurd. Yet many of the same circles that condemned him could not stop talking about him. He fascinated precisely because he crossed boundaries that others only imagined crossing. He was a peasant among princes, a supposedly holy man accused of sensual corruption, an outsider moving with impunity through sacred spaces of the dynasty. He seemed to mock class order simply by surviving it. That survival became intolerable to those who believed their world should have rejected him automatically. Every time he appeared again after some scandal, their hatred deepened. There were also personal enemies forming around him within the Romanov family itself. Some relatives of the Tsar found him appalling and warned that his presence damaged the monarchy's reputation. Others worried less about morality than about optics. Even if one were to assume the best of him, they argued, it was madness to allow such a man to remain associated with the throne. Here again, Nicholas and Alexandra failed to grasp the scale of the danger. Their isolation inside the emotional fortress of family life weakened their ability to see how Rasputin looked from outside. What seemed to them like loyalty to a friend and gratitude to a spiritual helper looked to others like blindness, decadence, and surrender. Yet, through all this, Rasputin continued to carry a peculiar confidence, as though scandal itself had become part of his method of existence. He had learned that disgust could be survived. He had learned that denunciation could even deepen his mystique. The more his enemies raged, the more his admirers could imagine him as a persecuted holy man, attacked by the proud and worldly. This is one reason he became so difficult to destroy. The same facts could be interpreted through opposite moral lenses. Drunkenness to one observer could be weakness forgiven by grace to another. Emotional domination could be read as spiritual authority. Familiarity with women could be cast either as depravity or as evidence that women trusted him with their souls. Each attack generated counter-belief, but history was moving around him, tightening. Industrial strikes and rural unrest did not disappear because a holy man wandered through aristocratic drawing rooms. National politics did not pause because the Empress sought comfort in prayer. The empire was becoming more fragile, not less, and figures like Rasputin were increasingly drawn into that fragility. He was no longer just a disturbing social phenomenon. He was becoming political shorthand for decay at the summit of power. Those who hated the autocracy could point to him as proof of its corruption. Those who wanted to save the monarchy could point to him as proof that it had lost all sense. Those within government who struggled to impose seriousness on affairs of state found themselves operating beneath the shadow of a man who represented the triumph of private influence over public order. This was the real scandal of Rasputin, more than any single rumor about women or wine. He made visible the permeability of the throne. He showed that in the late Romanov world, a man without office could still shape the environment of power if he found the right human weakness to enter through. In this case, the weakness was not simple foolishness. It was suffering. Alexandra's terror for her son opened the door. Nicholas's reluctance to wound his wife or confront a source of her hope left that door unguarded. Rasputin stepped through it and remained there, half healer, half parasite, impossible to define cleanly and therefore impossible to address cleanly. By the time society fully understood that he was not a passing curiosity, it was too late. He had become a fixed presence. Ministers complained, bishops murmured, aristocrats sneered, newspapers hinted, relatives warned. Yet he remained, and with each year the scandal around him thickened into something darker. He was no longer simply the Siberian peasant at court. He was becoming a legend while still alive, and a dangerous one. The man who could not be removed, the holy sinner near the throne, the whisper in the imperial household that every enemy of the dynasty had begun to hear. By the early 1910s, Rasputin had become something far more potent than a scandalous holy man whispered about in aristocratic drawing rooms. He had become a test. He tested the patience of ministers, the judgment of the imperial family, the credibility of the church, and the endurance of a political system already strained by distrust. Around him, people began to reveal themselves. Some clung more fiercely to him the more he was attacked. Some attacked him more furiously because they sensed he represented a deeper sickness they could not cure. And some, perhaps the most dangerous of all, tried to use him. This was the period in which Rasputin's name moved from the margins of elite gossip toward the center of Russia's crisis of confidence. He did not yet openly dominate public discussion every day, but he was no longer merely a private embarrassment known only to insiders. The educated classes increasingly knew his name. Bureaucrats knew it, bishops knew it, the political world knew it, the Duma knew it. And all across these circles, one question returned again and again in different forms. How had a Siberian peasant with no office, no learning, and no formal standing become so difficult to dislodge from the orbit of the throne? Part of the answer lay in the nature of autocracy itself. Russia's governing system depended not merely on laws and institutions, but on access to the sovereign. Formal structure mattered, but informal favor often mattered more. Men rose through the goodwill of the Tsar, through personal trust, through court alliances, through the invisible currents that passed beneath official power. Rasputin did not invent that world. He entered it through its most vulnerable opening. What made his position uniquely alarming was that he had done so not by becoming a statesman or a general, but by becoming emotionally and spiritually necessary to the Empress. That kind of influence had no proper place in official government, and yet official government could not escape it. As he grew bolder, petitioners began to seek him out not only for healing or blessing, but for practical help. A man hoping for advancement, a woman needing intervention, a provincial figure seeking protection, a churchman looking for favor, all could imagine that a word from Rasputin might matter. Often, it did. He could recommend, insinuate, encourage, or condemn. He could tell a petitioner that he would speak to Mama, meaning the Empress, or that he would pray and advise. His rooms became places where spiritual theater and political brokerage blended together. Even when his influence was exaggerated, the belief that he possessed influence became power in itself. If enough people thought he could help or harm them, they behaved accordingly. This is how systems begin to bend, not always through formal decrees, but through whispered expectations. A minister might wonder whether opposing a certain candidate would bring trouble if that candidate had Rasputin's approval. A bishop might calculate carefully before condemning him too directly. An ambitious courtier might flatter him without fully believing in him, simply because contempt had become risky. Thus, Rasputin's presence distorted not only decisions, but the atmosphere in which decisions were made. Men who should have felt secure in office found themselves glancing over their shoulders at an unofficial force none of them could measure. The astonishing thing was that Rasputin himself remained visibly unsuited to the role history was forcing upon him. He was not polished by proximity to greatness. He did not become restrained, dignified, or discreet as his stakes rose. If anything, he often seemed more openly himself, and that was precisely what scandalized society afresh. He drank heavily at times. He kept irregular hours. He surrounded himself with admirers, seekers, eccentrics, and opportunists. He could be expansive and sentimental one evening, sullen and domineering the next. Tales circulated of him embracing women, blessing them, touching them too freely, speaking to them in intimate tones, urging confession, then blurring the line between spiritual vulnerability and personal power. His defenders insisted that many stories were invented or maliciously embroidered. In some cases, that was surely true. Rasputin's enemies often repeated the most lurid accusations because lurid accusations were effective. But the broader problem did not require every rumor to be true. He behaved often enough in ways that created the conditions for scandal. He gave his enemies material. Even those inclined to excuse him as a man of the people, rough in manner but sincere in heart, had to reckon with the fact that his life did not reflect the disciplined humility expected of a religious guide. He was too exposed to temptation or too willing to indulge it, and far too careless about appearances for a man so dangerously placed. Yet there was something about him that resisted ordinary moral accounting. He was not ashamed in the way respectable society expected him to be ashamed. When denounced, he often endured it with a strange durability, retreating for a time, then returning as though nothing essential had changed. This baffled his enemies. Most public men can be destroyed by ridicule if they depend on prestige. Rasputin did not depend on prestige of the usual kind. He depended on access, emotional trust, and the aura of a man chosen by forces higher than the judgment of polite society. In a sense, every attack from refined circles confirmed his usefulness to those who already believed him holy. The proud hated him. That merely proved he belonged to God. This was the logic that protected him. Still, protection was not immunity. Around 1911 and after, serious conflict intensified between Rasputin and important church figures. One of the most significant was Bishop Hermogenes, once part of the broader circle that had shown interest in him, who became an enemy. The monk Iliador, another religious figure of influence and theatrical intensity, also turned against Rasputin after earlier association. These breaks mattered because they demonstrated that opposition to Rasputin was not only the snobbery of secular aristocrats offended by peasant manners, it was also the judgment of religious men who believed he was spiritually dangerous. They accused him of moral corruption and deceit. They wanted him exposed and removed. For a moment, it seemed possible that church and state pressure together might break him. But he survived this too. Rasputin's survival in each crisis reinforced the growing impression that he was somehow untouchable. enemies struck, investigations stirred, outrage spread, and still he remained. He could be sent away briefly, told to keep his distance, urged to return to Siberia, and yet before long he reappeared. His endurance was not magical in any literal sense. It came from the same hard fact each time. The Empress did not stop believing in him. Nicholas did not force a final separation. Those who hoped scandal would naturally destroy him failed to understand that his root system ran underground into the private suffering of the imperial family. Public shame cannot easily sever what private fear sustains. Then came another layer to his legend, one that would deepen his reputation among ordinary people and unsettle the powerful even more. Rasputin began to be seen in some circles as a man who spoke blunt truths others would not speak. He criticized vanity. He warned of pride. He could speak in rough peasant terms that cut through the sterile language of bureaucracy. To the devout and the disillusioned alike, this had appeal. Here perhaps was someone outside the polished lies of officialdom. Here was someone not yet hollowed out by etiquette. This perception exaggerated his wisdom, but it drew strength from a real contrast. Many of the empire's formal leaders sounded dead when they spoke. Rasputin sounded alive. That aliveness could become frightening in politics. The court was not just a household. It was the symbolic center of a giant empire trembling under social, economic, and ideological stress. Every improvised intervention, every private appeal, every emotional preference near the throne carried greater consequences than similar behavior would have carried in a healthier system. It was not necessary for Rasputin to issue commands. It was enough that others believed he could tilt judgment. In a government already weakened by hesitation and mistrust, that belief corroded confidence from within. The Duma increasingly reflected this wider unease. Politicians and public men who had no love for the old autocracy found in Rasputin a perfect emblem of its absurdity. Conservatives who wanted to preserve the monarchy saw him as a fatal embarrassment. Liberals saw him as proof that autocracy had decayed into irrationalism. Radicals saw him as one more sign that the system deserved destruction. Across ideological lines, he was useful because he symbolized something undeniable. The imperial court no longer inspired confidence. Whether he personally caused any given decision mattered less than what his presence said about the judgment of those at the top. And still, the imperial family clung to him. Alexandra's trust in Rasputin had by now hardened into something almost unanswerable. She believed him spiritually gifted. She believed his enemies lied. She believed his relationship with Alexei was evidence enough of divine purpose. She also felt increasingly isolated, not only from society, but from the nation itself. Born a German princess, shy by temperament, stiff in manner, and deeply serious, she had never been widely loved in Russia. Her reserve was interpreted as arrogance. Her piety could look cold. Her devotion to Rasputin therefore intensified existing hostility rather than softening it. She did not understand why others could not see what she saw in him. That incomprehension widened the gulf between court and country. Nicholas, too, remained tragically himself. He did not set out to let Rasputin become a national disgrace. He simply lacked the firmness to resolve a corrosive private problem before it ripened into public catastrophe. He preferred calm to confrontation, routine to rupture. He believed too easily that storms might pass if not fed. But storms do not always pass. Sometimes they gather strength in silence. For Rasputin, this was also a period of increasing self-belief. he seems to have grown more convinced that he had a role beyond that of healer. He offered broader observations on Russia, on peace and war, on the danger of pride among the great, on the blindness of those in power. He framed some of these intuitions in religious language as warnings or discernments. Whether he believed himself chosen in a prophetic sense or merely learned to inhabit the expectation others projected onto him, the result was similar. He began to act less like a man who had stumbled into influence and more like a man who thought influence belonged to him. Yet beneath all this, danger was growing around his body as well as his reputation. Hatred of Rasputin was becoming personal, visceral, almost physical. He was no longer merely mocked. He was increasingly seen as a contaminant. Some wanted him exposed, others wanted him beaten, banished, or broken. The contempt he inspired among sections of the elite had deepened into loathing, and loathing of that kind rarely remains content with argument forever. At the same time, ordinary Russians who knew little of the court's exact workings were beginning to absorb simplified versions of his story. In a country where literacy had expanded and rumor still traveled faster than truth, Rasputin became a figure large enough to be reshaped by every teller. To some, he was a saint. To many, he was a seducer. To others, he was a sorcerer, an antichrist-like corrupter, or a peasant demon with the royal family under his spell. The further his name traveled from the rooms where he actually stood, the more myth gathered around it. This widening distortion would eventually help make his death legendary. But first, it made his life combustible. The tragedy was that almost no one in power handled him wisely. His admirers refused to restrain him. His enemies often attacked him in ways so hysterical they made him easier to defend. The church condemned him, but could not decisively eliminate his standing. The bureaucracy resented him, but could not absorb or expel him. The court alternated between embarrassment and dependency. And Russia, vast and uneasy, watched as a man with no clear place in the state acquired a place no one could explain. That is how Rasputin ceased to be merely scandalous and became historic. He became the human shape of a deeper failure, the failure of a dynasty to distinguish private need from public duty, the failure of institutions to contain irregular power, the failure of a ruling world to understand how much legitimacy depends on appearances that are not false. A throne may survive criticism, corruption, even defeat. What it struggles to survive is ridicule joined to distrust. Rasputin brought both. By the time this phase of his life was fully underway, the question was no longer whether he mattered. He did. The question was how much damage would be done before anyone found a way to stop him, or whether stopping him had already become impossible. By 1914, the tension that had been building around Rasputin, around the court, and around Russia itself reached a point where it could no longer remain contained within drawing rooms and private letters. The empire was moving toward something vast and violent, something that would swallow smaller scandals and transform them into symbols of a much greater collapse. And in the strange, tightening web of fate that seemed to follow Rasputin everywhere, his own life would begin to mirror that shift, from controversy to danger, from rumor to blood. It began not in the capital, but far from it, back in Siberia. That summer, Rasputin returned to his home village of Pokrovskoye. Despite everything that had changed, despite the palace, the whispers, the growing notoriety, he still returned there, as though some part of him remained anchored in that simpler, harsher world. But even in Siberia, he was no longer just a villager. His name had traveled, his face was known, and hatred, once confined to the elite, had begun to follow him across the empire. On a warm day in July 1914, as Rasputin walked through the village streets, he was approached by a woman named Kyonia Guseva. She was not unknown to religious circles. She had connections to those who already opposed Rasputin, particularly the monk Iliador, who had once been close to Rasputin and had since turned fiercely against him. Guseva approached Rasputin as if seeking a blessing. Then she drew a knife. The attack was sudden and brutal. She stabbed him in the abdomen, driving the blade deep into his body. Witnesses later described the violence as shocking, almost unreal in its suddenness. Rasputin collapsed, gravely wounded, his life hanging by a thread. The man who had seemed untouchable in scandal now lay bleeding in the dirt of his own village. For a moment, it seemed that the story might end there. The wound was severe. His intestines were pierced. Infection was likely. Death in such conditions was not a distant possibility, but an immediate expectation. Those around him believed he would not survive. The attack itself was proof of how far hatred of him had spread. This was no longer just gossip or political resentment. Someone had tried to kill him. And yet, Rasputin did not die. He was taken for treatment, and against expectation, he survived the wound. The recovery was long, painful, and uncertain. For weeks he lingered between life and death, his body struggling to repair itself. But gradually, impossibly to some, he began to recover. This survival would become one of the first great pillars of his legend. To those who already believed in him, it confirmed what they had long suspected, that Rasputin was protected by something beyond ordinary human strength. A man stabbed in the stomach, left for dead, who somehow lived, seemed to defy natural order. To his enemies, it was infuriating. Even violence had failed to remove him. Even blood had not ended his influence. But while Rasputin lay recovering, something else was happening. Something far larger than his personal story. War was coming. In late July 1914, the crisis that had been building across Europe erupted into the First World War. Alliances activated, armies mobilized. Russia entered the conflict against Germany and Austria-Hungary. What had once been political tension hardened into total war, and the consequences for the Russian Empire would be catastrophic. Rasputin, from his sickbed, opposed the war. This is one of the more historically grounded aspects of his later reputation. He warned that war would bring disaster to Russia. He urged peace, or at least caution. Whether this came from genuine foresight, instinct, or a general distrust of the aristocratic and military classes pushing for conflict, the position itself was clear. Rasputin did not want Russia to enter the war, but his voice, at that moment, was limited. He was wounded, far from the capital, and the machinery of empire had already moved beyond hesitation. Nicholas II committed Russia to war, and with that decision, the fate of the dynasty, and eventually Rasputin himself, became tied to a conflict that would strain the country to breaking point. War changed everything. At first, like many nations entering the conflict, Russia experienced a surge of patriotic unity. But that unity did not last. The realities of modern warfare quickly overwhelmed the empire's fragile systems. The Russian army suffered from poor equipment, inadequate leadership, and logistical failures. Soldiers went to the front without sufficient rifles, without proper supplies, sometimes without even boots. Casualties mounted rapidly. Back in the capital, shortages began to appear. Food became less reliable, inflation rose, confidence in the government weakened. And as conditions worsened, people began looking for explanations, for someone or something to blame. Rasputin's name was ready. By the time he returned to St. Petersburg, now renamed Petrograd due to anti-German sentiment, he entered a city transformed by war. The atmosphere was heavier, more suspicious, more desperate, and his position within the imperial circle had changed as well. Because in 1915, Nicholas II made one of the most consequential decisions of his reign. He chose to take personal command of the Russian army at the front. This decision removed him physically from the capital, placing him at military headquarters and leaving the day-to-day administration of the empire largely in the hands of the Empress Alexandra. And Alexandra, more than ever, relied on Rasputin. This is the point where his influence, whether exaggerated or not, became politically explosive. With the Tsar absent, the Empress became the central authority in Petrograd. Ministers came and went, government positions shifted, decisions had to be made in a rapidly deteriorating situation. And through it all, Rasputin remained close to Alexandra, advising, encouraging, warning, and reinforcing her instincts. To many observers, it appeared that Rasputin was now effectively guiding the government of Russia through the Empress. This perception, whether fully accurate or not, was devastating. It did not matter that Rasputin was not formally issuing decrees. It did not matter that the machinery of state still existed. What mattered was that ministers believed he had influence. The public believed he had influence. The Duma believed he had influence. And increasingly, that belief hardened into certainty. He became associated with ministerial appointments. When a capable official was dismissed, it was said Rasputin had opposed him. When an incompetent figure rose, it was said Rasputin had supported him. When chaos increased, his name was invoked as a cause. Some of this was exaggeration. Russia's problems were vast and structural, far beyond any one man's control. But perception often outweighs reality in politics, and Rasputin had become a perfect symbol of everything that seemed wrong. A peasant mystic, whispering into the ear of the Empress, while the empire bled. The image was too powerful to resist, and Rasputin himself did little to soften it. He continued to meet visitors. He continued to speak freely. He continued to behave in ways that offended the sensibilities of a society already on edge. Reports of drunkenness persisted. Stories of inappropriate conduct circulated more widely. His presence in Petrograd became less like that of a spiritual advisor and more like that of a looming shadow over the government. Even those who might have defended him earlier began to waver, because now the stakes were no longer private. Men were dying at the front, cities were straining, the legitimacy of the monarchy itself was weakening, and at the center of it all stood a man who seemed completely out of place, yet impossible to remove. Opposition hardened. Members of the aristocracy, the Duma, and even the royal family began to speak more openly about the danger Rasputin represented, not just to morality, but to the survival of the state. They argued that as long as he remained close to the Empress, the credibility of the monarchy would continue to erode. Some demanded his removal. Others began to consider more drastic solutions, because by now, Rasputin was no longer just a scandal or even just a political problem. He had become a liability in a time of war. And in times of war, liabilities are not tolerated forever. What made the situation even more dangerous was that Rasputin himself seemed to sense both his importance and his vulnerability. He warned that if he were killed, terrible consequences would follow for the royal family. Whether this was prophecy, intuition, or self-preservation, it added another layer to his legend. The idea that his death might trigger disaster made him seem not only powerful in life, but dangerous in death, and so the paradox deepened. The more he was hated, the more necessary he seemed to those who believed in him. The more necessary he seemed, the more dangerous he appeared to everyone else. Russia, meanwhile, continued its descent into crisis. Food shortages worsened. Military failures continued. Public anger grew. Trust in leadership collapsed. And Rasputin's name, repeated again and again in rumor and accusation, became tied to that collapse in the minds of many. By late 1915 and into 1916, the question was no longer whether Rasputin should be removed. It was how. And for some men, increasingly, the answer was becoming clear. He could not be persuaded. He could not be exposed. He could not be pushed aside, so he would have to be killed. By 1916, Rasputin was no longer merely a man moving through scandal. He had become a presence that seemed to hang over the Russian Empire like a fever dream. His name drifted through barracks, salons, ministries, railway stations, and bread lines. Some spoke it with contempt, some with dread, some with fascination, and some with that peculiar kind of belief that grows strongest when the world itself seems to be coming apart. What had once been an unsettling court rumor had become something much larger. Rasputin now stood in the public imagination as a sign that Russia's rulers had lost all proportion, all balance, and perhaps all right to govern. The war had made everything harder, harsher, and more unforgiving. Military losses were staggering, supplies failed, inflation bit deeper into everyday life. Ordinary people suffered in visible, accumulating ways. The monarchy, already weakened by years of misjudgment, now appeared not only distant, but incapable. Every failure demanded an explanation, and a nation under strain tends to gather its anger around figures who can symbolize what feels rotten beyond repair. Rasputin was almost perfectly suited to that role. He was strange, unregulated, intimate with power, morally compromised and protected in ways no one could respect. He looked like corruption, even when corruption was more complex than any single man. It is important to be precise here. Rasputin did not single-handedly ruin the Russian Empire. He did not invent military incompetence, food shortages, transport breakdown, court isolation, or the long structural tensions that had haunted the Romanov state for decades. But by 1916, he had become one of the most visible human embodiments of those failures. He represented the collapse of proper boundaries. A peasant mystic, half healer and half scandal, had become inseparable from the image of government itself. That was politically disastrous. With Nicholas II away for long stretches at military headquarters, Alexandra's role in domestic affairs increased. And because Alexandra trusted Rasputin with a near-religious intensity, ministers and officials found themselves operating in the shadow of a man they neither understood nor respected. This did not mean Rasputin sat at a desk drafting policy. The reality was less theatrical and more corrosive. He influenced the mood of the Empress, reinforced her instincts, warned against those he distrusted, approved of those he favored, and helped shape the emotional environment in which decisions were made. In a stable government, this would already have been dangerous. In a government under wartime strain, it was poisonous. The turnover of ministers during this period became one of the great indictments of late Romanov rule. Offices shifted, men were appointed, dismissed, or undermined with bewildering speed. Competence seemed less important than access, impression, and court atmosphere. Whether Rasputin was directly responsible for each appointment later attributed to him is a question historians have examined carefully, and the answer is not simple. Some claims were exaggerated by enemies eager to blame him for every absurdity. Yet even where direct causation cannot be proved in every case, the broader truth remains. His presence fed instability. He intensified the sense that government had become private, irrational, and porous. Men who needed authority found themselves diminished by the suspicion that some unseen influence had spoken against them in a private room. This was the year in which hatred of Rasputin became fully political in the deepest sense. He was no longer only condemned as immoral. He was condemned as a national danger. Conservatives who wanted to save the throne believed he was accelerating its destruction. Liberals saw him as proof that the autocracy was hopelessly diseased. Reactionaries feared his influence over Alexandra. Nationalists whispered treason, especially because the Empress had German origins and wartime paranoia sharpened every suspicion. Some rumors even suggested that Rasputin and Alexandra were effectively betraying Russia from within, a slander without credible evidence, but one that spread easily because the atmosphere had become so dark. In times of disaster, people prefer a face for their fear. Rasputin's face was already available, and he kept feeding the myth. He still received visitors. He still moved through Petrograd in ways that shocked the respectable world. He still drank. He still seemed to gather women around him. Reports accumulated of late-night scenes, indiscretion, crudeness, and spiritual theater dissolving into vulgarity. One of the many paradoxes of Rasputin is that he could be politically dangerous even when doing nothing overtly political. Every news story of drunken behavior made it easier for his enemies to say that the empire was governed, if not directly then atmospherically, by filth and madness. Every sighting of him with admirers, petitioners, or wealthy women added to the sense that the center of power had been invaded by something indecent and unstoppable. Yet, not all who approached him were fools, and not all who opposed him were clear-sighted. Rasputin continued to inspire real devotion in some people. There were still those who believed he possessed spiritual gifts, who saw his roughness as authenticity rather than corruption, who interpreted attacks on him as proof that he was hated by the proud because he brought uncomfortable truth. He could be warm, emotionally perceptive, even tender. He could make people feel chosen, heard, and forgiven. That human effect did not vanish simply because the political situation worsened. If anything, chaos made his form of personal certainty more seductive. The world was unstable. Rasputin, for all his disorder, radiated confidence. There are moments in history when confidence alone can feel like revelation. But confidence also made him reckless. By late 1916, he seems to have lived with a strange mixture of self-importance and fatalism. He knew how much he was hated. He knew the scale of the intrigue around him. He had already survived scandal, investigation, public disgrace, and a nearly fatal stabbing. These experiences may have deepened his sense that he was protected by destiny, or they may simply have dulled his caution. In either case, he did not withdraw. He did not disappear into Siberia or renounce access to the court. He remained where danger was thickest, as if compelled toward the very center of the storm gathering around him. Around this time, stories circulated more widely that Rasputin had made a prediction concerning his own death. Versions differ, and later retellings embroidered them, but the core idea became famous. If he were killed by common people, the Tsar would remain secure. If he were killed by nobles, then the imperial family would soon fall. Whatever the exact wording or timing of this prophecy, it entered as legend because it was too powerful not to survive. It transformed a possible murder into something larger than murder. It made his death sound like a trigger hidden inside the fate of the dynasty itself. To believers, it suggested supernatural foresight. To skeptics, it suggested manipulative self-dramatization, yet even skeptics would later struggle not to shiver at how events unfolded. By the autumn and winter of 1916, elements of the elite had moved beyond disgust into conspiracy. The feeling among some aristocrats and conservatives was no longer that Rasputin should somehow be discredited. It was that he must be physically removed before he dragged the monarchy into complete ruin. These men did not see themselves merely as avengers of morality. Many imagined themselves as patriots, surgeons preparing to cut out a diseased organ to save the body of the state. This is one of history's cruel ironies. Several of the men who would help kill Rasputin believed they were acting to preserve the Romanov throne. In reality, they were already too late. The central figures in the plot emerged from circles close enough to court life to understand both the humiliation Rasputin represented and the paralysis protecting him. Among them, the most famous was Prince Felix Yusupov, fabulously wealthy, aristocratic, theatrical, and restless. Yusupov was married to Irina, a niece of the Tsar, which placed him inside the extended imperial orbit. He was also the sort of man drawn to dramatic roles. To later generations, he would present himself as a hero who rid Russia of a monster, and his memoirs would do much to shape the most famous version of the assassination. But the Yusupov account, while vivid, is not wholly reliable. He had every reason to make the story more sensational, more gothic, more unforgettable. The myth of Rasputin's death owes much to that vanity. Alongside Yusupov stood Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, another member of the imperial family, and Vladimir Purishkevich, a right-wing member of the Duma, known for his ferocity and theatrical rhetoric. Their alliance itself reveals the depth of the crisis. An aristocratic prince, a Romanov Grand Duke, and a reactionary politician found common cause in the belief that one unofficial holy man had become intolerable to the state. Others hovered around the edges of the plot, but these names would be etched most deeply into the story. Why did they move when they did? Because by late 1916, time felt short. The war dragged on, public confidence withered, Rasputin's place near Alexandra seemed secure. Warnings had failed, gossip had failed, clerical opposition had failed, family pressure had failed. To the conspirators, assassination began to look not like criminality, but necessity. They believed that remove Rasputin, and the Empress might recover her judgment, the throne might regain credibility, ministers might function, and some measure of order might return. It was a desperate fantasy, but desperate men often confuse decisive violence with effective action. Rasputin, meanwhile, continued to live as though the noose tightening around him was only another strand in the web of his legend. He visited acquaintances, received supplicants, moved through society's shadows and half-lit rooms. He was watched, discussed, mocked, feared. His enemies imagined him as a spider at the center of Russia's misery. His admirers still saw a vessel of grace. He himself may have sensed both images and leaned into them. He was no passive victim and not an innocent one. He had exploited access, cultivated mystique, and behaved in ways that made destruction more likely. Yet there was also something tragic in the scale of projection gathering on his body. By 1916, Rasputin no longer belonged only to himself. He belonged to everyone's story about why Russia was breaking. Petrograd that winter was a city of tension layered upon tension. Snow, shortages, queues, official vehicles, uniforms, prayer, rumor, police, newspaper insinuations, and private terror all coexisted in uneasy proximity. The empire had not yet fallen, but many could feel the structure shuddering. In such an atmosphere, the decision to kill one man could take on an almost mystical weight. It could be imagined as purification, sacrifice, deliverance, or revenge. The conspirators stepped into that mood. They told themselves a murder might become salvation. There is something almost dreamlike in the final weeks before Rasputin's death. He was still alive, still talking, still visiting, still generating scandal, but the story had already acquired the pressure of inevitability. Too many men hated him. Too many failures clung to his name. Too many hopes and resentments had accumulated around him. The nation was reaching for violence in every direction, and Rasputin stood near the center of a private version of that larger national impulse. Russia wanted an answer, a culprit, a ritual act. The conspirators decided he would be it. They began to prepare the trap. What followed would become one of the most famous deaths in modern legend, told and retold until fact nearly disappeared beneath theater. Poisoned cakes, drugged wine, bullets, beating, drowning, a man who rose again and would not die. These elements would fuse into a story so irresistible that it eclipsed the simpler, darker truth beneath it. But before the myth came, the invitation. Before the river came the night. Before the legend of the man who would not die, there was a group of nobles convincing themselves that murder in a palace cellar might save an empire already slipping beyond their reach. On the night of December 29th to 30th, 1916, Old Style, or December 16th to 17th by the calendar then used in Russia, Grigori Rasputin stepped into the final act of his life. He was 47 years old, feared across the empire, defended by the Empress, despised by much of the aristocracy, and by then so thoroughly wrapped in rumor that even the truth of his daily movements seemed to arrive already half transformed into story. Petrograd was cold, tense, and exhausted. Russia itself was deep in war, deep in hunger, deep in distrust. Every institution seemed to be straining under weight it could no longer carry. And in that atmosphere, the murder of one man began to feel to a small circle of conspirators not only justified, but necessary. Prince Felix Yusupov was the bait. He had the name, the rank, and the social access required to bring Rasputin into a private setting without immediate suspicion. Yusupov later claimed that he lured Rasputin to the Moika Palace by promising that Rasputin would meet his wife, Princess Irina, who was widely admired for her beauty. Whether Rasputin came chiefly from vanity, desire, curiosity, or simple trust in Yusupov's invitation, the result was the same. Late that night, he arrived at the palace. The plan, at least in a version that became famous, was simple. Rasputin would be brought downstairs to a lower room, given cakes and wine laced with cyanide, and quietly eliminated. If poison worked, the rest would be easy. There would be no messy struggle, no gunfire, no public uproar, just the disappearance of a man many believed had already done too much damage to continue living. But the story of what happened next became one of the most disputed and mythologized sequences in modern history. According to Yusupov's later account, Rasputin sat in the basement room, ate poisoned cakes, drank poisoned wine, and yet showed no sign of dying. Time passed. The conspirators upstairs grew anxious. Rasputin remained alive. In this version, the poison that should have killed him failed completely, as though his body itself rejected death. Yusupov then claimed he finally shot Rasputin at close range, believing the matter finished. The conspirators approached the fallen man, only for Rasputin to rise again, staggering toward escape, forcing them into a final chase and further violence before his body was disposed of in the river. It is one of the great death scenes of historical legend. It is also almost certainly heavily dramatized. Modern historians have treated Yusupov's retelling with caution for good reason. He had every incentive to turn the murder into a Gothic spectacle. The more impossible Rasputin seemed to kill, the greater Yusupov's own role appeared in defeating him. The story enlarged both men at once, Rasputin into a near-supernatural villain, and Yusupov into the man brave enough to destroy him. Later accounts by other conspirators also differed in important details. The forensic evidence available afterward did not clearly support every sensational element of the legend. In particular, the poison story has long been questioned. Some historians believe the poison may not have been used in the way later described, or perhaps not effectively at all. Much of the famous tale came through self-serving memoir and retrospective embellishment. What seems closest to the solid core is darker and simpler. Rasputin was lured to the Moika Palace. He was shot there. He may have still been alive after the first shot. More shots followed. He was beaten or at least handled violently in the chaos surrounding the murder. His body was eventually taken away and dumped into the Neva River through a hole in the ice. Even stripped of embellishment, the act remains brutal enough. But human beings have rarely been satisfied with brutality alone. They want meaning in death, especially when the dead man has already become larger than life. And so the story that spread was not merely that Rasputin had been murdered, it was that he had refused to die. Poison failed. Bullets failed. He rose again. He clawed his way toward freedom like something unnatural, something demonic or divinely shielded, something beyond the ordinary limits of flesh. This was the version the world remembered because it fit the Rasputin people wanted. Not a disordered, powerful, morally compromised mystic, but a monster from whom death itself recoiled. In the immediate aftermath, confusion rippled outward. Rasputin's disappearance could not be concealed for long. He had too many connections, too many enemies, too much significance. Soon his body was recovered from the river. An autopsy followed. The details became part of the argument over how exactly he died and whether the drowning itself had contributed to death. Popular imagination would later insist he was still alive when thrown into the water, that only the freezing river finally ended him. This became one of the most famous parts of the myth, but the medical evidence has been interpreted in different ways, and certainty is difficult. The truth, again, is less theatrical than the legend insists, and perhaps more terrible for that reason. A group of high-born conspirators shot and killed a man in secret, then discarded his body like evidence. The murderers believed they had performed a patriotic act. They had not. Yusupov, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, Purishkevich, and the others imagined that removing Rasputin would shock the monarchy back into seriousness. They thought Alexandra would be freed from his influence, the court's reputation would improve, and the country might yet be steadied. It was the logic of men acting late inside a doomed system, still convinced that one violent correction might undo years of weakness, mistrust, and war. But the problem had long ceased to be only Rasputin. He was a symptom, an accelerant, a humiliation, a symbol. Killing the symbol could not repair the structure that had produced him and protected him. Nicholas and Alexandra were shaken by the murder, though not in the way the conspirators had hoped. Alexandra was devastated. She had trusted Rasputin as a protector of her son and as a man sent by God. His death did not awaken her to earlier error. If anything, it confirmed for her the wickedness of those who had hated him. Nicholas, characteristically, reacted without the decisive political transformation that might have mattered had it come years earlier. The conspirators were punished only lightly in relative terms. Yusupov was exiled to his estate. Dmitry Pavlovich was sent away to military service in Persia. These were not trivial consequences, but neither were they signs of a regime suddenly recovered into strength. The monarchy remained what it had been, wounded, hesitant, insulated, and running out of time. And time, by then, was almost gone. The astonishing thing about Rasputin's death is not merely the violence of it or the legend it produced. It is how little it changed. For years, his enemies had spoken as though he were the dark knot holding everything together, the malevolent center of a corrupt web. Once he was dead, that fantasy should have dissolved, yet within a matter of weeks, Russia's crisis deepened further. The winter of 1916 into 1917 was severe. Food shortages worsened, public anger mounted, the state's capacity to command obedience thinned dangerously. The army was exhausted, the cities were hungry, the aura of the dynasty had collapsed beyond easy repair. In March 1917, by the modern calendar, the February Revolution broke out in Petrograd. Demonstrations over bread and hardship became mass unrest. Troops faltered, authority evaporated, Nicholas II abdicated. The Romanov autocracy, which had ruled for centuries, came apart with breathtaking speed. Rasputin had been dead only a short time. This is where the prophecy attached to his name took on its enduring force. He was widely believed to have warned that if nobles killed him, the imperial family would soon fall. Whether the wording later quoted was exact, altered, or romanticized, the sequence of events gave the warning a terrible afterlife. Aristocrats murdered Rasputin in December 1916. By March 1917, the Tsar had abdicated. In July 1918, Nicholas, Alexandra, their children, and several loyal attendants were executed by the Bolsheviks at Ekaterinburg. To later believers, this fulfilled Rasputin's prediction. To skeptics, it remained coincidence sharpened by hindsight, but either way, the pattern was unforgettable. The man called madman, saint, fraud, healer, and corrupter had gone into death-trailing prophecy, and history had cruelly arranged itself so that the prophecy appeared to come true. His body did not rest peacefully for long either. After the revolution, the provisional authorities and those hostile to the old regime had no desire to allow Rasputin's grave to become a shrine. His remains, buried earlier near Tsarskoye Selo, were exhumed and burned. Even in death, he could not be left alone. It was as though Russia feared him as a corpse almost as much as it had feared him alive. That, too, strengthened the legend. A man murdered, cast into a river, buried, dug up, burned, scattered. His end seemed unable to settle into one fixed form. And from there, Rasputin passed fully into myth. In the decades that followed, he became many things to many people. To monarchists longing for a lost world, he could appear as a tragic and misunderstood spiritual figure, blamed too heavily for sins that belonged to the whole late Romanov system. To liberals and revolutionaries, he remained proof of imperial decay, the obscene intimacy between autocracy and irrationality. To popular culture, he became something stranger still, the hypnotic monk who seduced noblewomen, the peasant devil who controlled a queen, the holy fraud who could survive poison and bullets, the black-bearded sorcerer at the edge of apocalypse. Very little of this was wholly true, yet none of it emerged from nothing. The real Rasputin was not as supernatural as legend, not as all-powerful as propaganda, and not as innocent as sentimental revision would prefer. He did not control Russia single-handedly. He did not bring down the empire by himself. But neither was he just a harmless mystic destroyed by snobbery. He cultivated power through private access. He exploited trust. He behaved scandalously. He blurred spiritual authority and personal appetite. He entered the emotional wound at the heart of the imperial family and remained there, transforming private fear into public danger. If his enemies exaggerated him, they did so because he had given exaggeration room to grow. The title, "The Man Who Wouldn't Die," endures because it captures more than the assassination story. It captures the way Rasputin survived every attempt to reduce him to one meaning. He would not die as a simple villain because he genuinely brought comfort where doctors often brought only dread. He would not die as a simple holy man because appetite and manipulation clung too closely to him. He would not die as a mere political footnote because his name fused itself to the end of the Romanovs in the imagination of the world. He would not die in memory because every generation found in him a different warning. Sometimes that warning is about charisma. A man with no office, no doctrine, and no formal power can still become immensely dangerous if he gains intimate access to frightened rulers. Sometimes the warning is about systems. When institutions weaken, irregular people rise through their cracks. Sometimes the warning is about myth itself. The more unstable a society becomes, the more desperately it reaches for figures who can explain everything at once, whether as saviors or as demons. Rasputin became that kind of figure because late imperial Russia was already breaking apart around him. He did not create the fracture, but he lived inside it so vividly that history could not forget him. A Siberian peasant wandered west into the heart of an empire. A mother believed his prayers could save her son. A court failed to contain him. A nation turned him into a symbol. Aristocrats murdered him in secret. The monarchy fell soon after. And out of blood, ice, fear, and memory came a legend so durable that it nearly swallowed the man himself. Perhaps that is the final truth about Rasputin. He did die, of course. However chaotic the final night, however embellished the stories, however long the rumors lingered, he died like every other man. But the version of him history created did not. That Rasputin kept rising, out of the cellar, out of the river, out of the ashes, out of revolution, out of songs and films and whispered retellings. He rose because he belonged not just to the past, but to that darker place where power, faith, fear, and decay meet and make monsters out of men.